Well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Trustee podcast. And as usual, I'm joined by Tracey, besters in the Southern Highlands. How are you, Tracey? And it's great to see you as usual.
Thank you so much, Darin. I am doing really well. The Southern Highlands is just putting on the weather at the moment. You know, this perfect time in spring is like just amazing down here. So come visit us soon, Darin.
I'm still not convinced it's not freezing down there, but anyway, that's a story for another time. Now, of course, we have a sponsor for the podcast, and this podcast is brought to you by Super Fund Property Valuations. Take the tension out of tax time by making Super Fund Property Valuations your number one choice for all your SMSF property valuation requirements. Order a report today by filling in your details online at superfundpropertyvaluations.com.au and let Superfund Property Valuations take care of the hard work. And as usual, a shout out to William Spark and his team there. And as I said last time, they deal with all sorts of quirky properties. Last time he was talking about an airport. And I know that they've talked about wind farms and all that sort of stuff. So they are fabulous as far as that goes. And of course, valuations, the ATO sent out a warning about valuations earlier this week, actually. So still an area of focus and an area that trustees really don't want to get wrong. But anyway, I digress. Now, listeners to our last episode will know that we covered off Div 926 tax, just with an update on where it was at. And I know the cliche is a week is a long time in football or politics or sport or whatever you want to fill in that. But obviously, the gap between podcasts is a long time in the SMSF world. And of course, this week we've had what I would consider a change of heart by the government, and they have announced amendments to the Div 296 tax policy, which I think has been welcomed on all fronts. Wouldn't you agree with that, Tracey?
Totally, Darin. And I think that when we spoke about the Div 296 update, it was to basically say that there hadn't been an update last time. But you're right, like there's a lot's happened in that since the last podcast, a lot has happened. And I welcome the changes that the government has announced. I think it's much more practical and gives a whole lot more certainty to all of us in the industry. So thanks to the government for that. Although, of course, we don't have all of the detail yet. So
No, we're still waiting on some of the detail. And of course, this is not the ultimate solution in seeing the government completely scrap this tax. We can't bring you that great news. But we can say that those of you who haven't heard of some of the more granular detail on the announcement, they have pretty much eliminated what most people would consider the more egregious elements of what the original policy was proposing. So if we go through those, obviously, arguably the most egregious one was the taxing of unrealized capital gains in your super fund. That's gone now. They're not
yeah,
using that premise anymore. They've also introduced indexation, which obviously also addresses what I would describe as bracket creep in the superannuation system. Effectively, it's bracket creep if you just leave the original threshold forever at that level ad infinitum. So they've changed that. Indexation is being included now. But they slipped one in that none of us saw coming, and I don't think I heard it in any discussion circles, but there are going to be two thresholds now. So there's the original $3 million threshold, as well as one for people whose total super balance is over 10 million as well. And there's two different tax rates for that too. So
yeah.
couple of good things, but one that's slipped in there without our notice. So they're the
Yeah.
basic changes, aren't they, Tracey?
Yeah, they are, Darren, and I think that totally happy that unrealized gains is out the door, because that was the one that I guess talking to people about this all the time, that was the thing they were most concerned about. Like indexation, they were concerned about, but this whole concept of taxing unrealized gains was just mind blowing for people. Like, how can you tax unrealized gains? And you had the whole argument, well, land tax is on, in like market value, and this is on council rates are on market value. Yeah, whatever, whatever. But, from an income tax perspective, we don't tax unrealized gains. And the government have heeded that message. So, and it doesn't matter where that message came from the government, they heeded it. So, whether it was from, I'm sure it was our podcast 2 weeks ago, Darren, that was the turning point for the government. Wouldn't you agree on that one?
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure Jim
Good.
Chambers would have been listening to our podcast, and hopefully the light bulb moment went off for him after listening to us talk about it and think, hey, maybe these two are onto something.
I reckon. I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. Next time we see Jim Chalmers, we'll be sure to ask him that question. But the surprising part of this announcements this week was that $10 million threshold. So
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about overcomplicating things, but we've now got two thresholds, as you said. We've got the $3 million, and that's going to be an effective tax rate of 30%. And then we've got the $10 million threshold, and that's going to be an effective tax rate of 40%. So they've whacked on an additional 10% if you're over 10 mil. Why did they do that? Don't know. Don't know what the premise was on that, I guess, rather than wanting to just recoup some of the delayed impact of the Div 296 not coming in for another year. That was the other thing. It's been delayed for another year.
Yes, I did forget to. I mean, we
Mm.
say that we say that it's delayed for another year, but effectively it's only a matter of what, eight
9 months,
months,
8 months.
9 to 8 months, because
Yeah,
the start date now is the 1st of July 2026. So
correct.
um, it's still not heeding Treasury's own recommendation or the Treasurer's staff's own recommendation that people need, what was it, at least a 1 year runway
Yeah.
to prepare for this. So, obviously hasn't heeded that advice. But it's still look, it's still a result. And just want to clarify, obviously the tax rates applicable to the $3 million threshold and the $10 million threshold are not 30% across the board. It's just an extra
No.
15%. As you know, it's calculated differently. And then the 10 million one is just another 10% on top of that. And
Yeah, absolutely.
again, it's only going to be calculated. We don't have a whiteboard to actually draw the formula out for you, but it will only be calculated on the portion of the tax that is over that threshold and the earnings that apply to the portion of the total super balance that is over that threshold. Big
Correct.
mouthful, I know. If you can wrap your head around it, that's really good. But that's effectively what has happened here.
Yeah, absolutely, Darren. And I think that the calculation at face value, and we don't have all of the detail, and devil is always in the detail, and we won't see that detail for some time still. But the calculation at face value does seem a whole lot simpler than what we had previously, because previously we had this concept of adjusted total super balance where you had all of these add backs and subtractions and all of this stuff going on. Now it seems as though it's going to be number one, identifying who is an in-scope member. So, and the ATO will be the ones responsible for identifying. So they'll inevitably contact you to say, oh, by the way, you're in scope. You have total super balance across the board of all of your superannuation accounts above $3 million or above $10 million. You become in scope once you get above $3 million, from my understanding. But then now the onus is on the superannuation funds as to calculating the realized earnings and attributing those realized earnings to the in-scope members. So that kind of shifts a bit of the compliance burden in my mind away from the ATO and onto our poor SMSF trustees and our accounting administrators and auditors to be able to say, well, what is the realized earnings and how have you allocated those realized earnings to these in-scope members? So I think that's going to be our next challenge, is getting our heads around that.
Yeah, hopefully that'll be an easy process. I love the way that they use these terms like in-scope member. I mean, Basically, that just means, hey, buddy, you've been caught. You've been caught by the measure. The ATO says you've been caught by the measure. I mean, in scope member. I mean, can we just use some plain language so that we can all
Yes.
understand? And I mean, seriously, who comes up with this stuff?
Can't we just say members over with a total super amount over $3 million? Like, why do we need a
I know.
terminology for it? Exactly.
Difficult. How difficult is that?
Exactly.
Just
Exactly.
ridiculous. But yes, the ATO will be identifying the in-scope members. So I suppose, more emphasis is going to be on the SMSF annual return, and you'll probably see
Yeah.
an even harder sort of crackdown is maybe not the right word, but effort from the regulator to ensure that there aren't or there isn't this ongoing problem of late or non-lodged annual returns, which is currently a big concern for the ATO. So
Yeah.
again, more emphasis on that document.
Correct. And that's the big thing, isn't it, Darin? In my mind, the SMSF annual return is so busy as it is. I don't know how much more they can fit into the SMSF annual return, but it's got to be that SAR, that SMSF annual return, that's
Yeah,
going to be its
yeah,
reporting mechanism to the ATO. We have at the moment, we kind of have all of the information on the SAR that the ATO would need, depending on the definition of realised earnings, and we'll talk about how that relates to capital gains in a second, I guess. But all of the information is on the SAR. We already report income, we already report expenses, we already report the allocated earnings to each of the members. We already report the members' balances and contributions the members made and withdrawals the members made if that comes into play. So all of that information is already being reported. Is it in the format that the ATO needs to be able to do this quick calculation? Because I'm sure it's going to be like this. It's going to be quick. Is all of that information there, or is there going to be something else? And I think that question around is there going to be something else really does determine around determine it will be determined by, I should say, what this definition of realised earnings will be as it relates to a property sale or an investment or asset sale. So maybe we'll talk about that now.
yeah, absolutely. There is a little bit of indication, isn't there,
Yeah, a
with
little bit.
what's been released as to how that might operate. I'm not talking about specific detail, but maybe it can be interpreted. I know it's dangerous to interpret or assume things, but it can probably be interpreted on face value that it's going to be all right.
Yeah, I think so, Darin. And we're really working on this, 5 page, I think it's 5 page, yeah, 5 page, better targeted superannuation concessions Treasury fact sheet that was released this week, along with the Treasurer's announcement. And that's all we've got to go on at the moment. So in this fact sheet, it does say that the Div 296 is going to be moving to a realised earnings approach that aligns to existing income tax concepts. So that kind of says to us, well, or says to me, look, we know what existing income tax concepts are there. Nothing has changed in terms of existing income tax concepts. So if we align the realised earnings with those existing income tax concepts, we should have a fairly clear understanding of what that will look like. So if that's the case, then I guess when we talk about a property sale or an asset sale and we have realised capital gains, well, we're talking about a discounted capital gain approach in my mind. So, well, that's what I'm hoping for, that we have a discounted capital gain approach, that we're not talking about notional capital gains or just your total capital gains, that we are allowing that discount. But what happens if you've got a superannuation fund that, let's say has purchased property and we currently are sitting on a $2 million unrealised gain? Are we going to see a reset of some of that capital gains tax value to the start date of Div 296, i.e. what happened in 2017 when we had our better simple super rules that have never been better and simple? But are we going to see a reset of some way, shape or form back to what is the value as at the beginning? Are we going to see that, or are we going to be looking at, because we're talking about realised earnings concept, are we going to be paying this additional Div 296 tax on realised gains in its entirety that have been in play for quite some time, well before this Div 296 came into play? So That's going to be interesting to see how that one plays out.
Yeah, look, I'd imagine that they'd have to do some sort of reset. Because otherwise this tax could end up being a greater penalty um, than what it was when they were taxing unrealized capital gains, because you can go back infinitum, and depending on what the base value
Yeah.
of the asset is and what the capital gain to date is, that could end up being
Yeah.
more than the unrealized capital gains apart from 1 July 2025 to whenever. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming that they will have to implement some sort of reset
Yeah.
there. Now that's good from a Division 296 tax point of view, but it's not necessarily so good from a fund administrative point of view, because it will mean
Not
that
at all.
you will have to monitor the value of that asset with the value starting at the 1st of July 2026
Hmm.
until whenever you might sell it. And you're also going to have to monitor the capital gains from when you actually first bought the asset and the gain that you've enjoyed from when you sell it. So there's kind of like two timelines that are going to have to be potentially monitored, which
Yeah.
obviously is a little bit inconvenient for administrative purposes.
Definitely inconvenient, Darin, and somewhat complex as well. Like even the CGT cost-based resets that we went through back in 2017, that was very complex. Like it doesn't sound like it's complex, but it was a fairly complex situation. So that's going to be an admin and compliance burden that the industry has to wear to be able to calculate, well, what does that look like? And you're absolutely right in terms of the comment you made before that some members would be worse off under this model than they would have been under the unrealized gains model. And I have a client in exactly that situation. I think I might have shared on the last podcast when I did the modeling for him under the old announcements. The income tax or the Div 296 tax was only a few $1,000s. Under these current announcements, that would be much, much higher because he is sitting on a very large unrealized capital gain from the sale of from a property that was purchased quite a number of years ago, or decades ago actually. So yeah, that'll be interesting. And I guess the other thing that's in my mind that will be interesting to see how that one plays out is exempt current pension income. And how does that all flow into this concept of realized earnings? Are we going to see a situation where our exempt current pension income is not quite as favorable as it has been because of this additional Div 296 component? And what does that look like? I can't get my head around that part yet either.
Yeah, it's a little bit ironic because the way it's affected, it means that exempt current pension income may not actually be as large as it once was, because some of it will be eroded because it gets captured by Division 296. So
Yeah.
in effect, you'll have to pay some tax on what you considered the exempt current pension income, where you pay no tax. So that's
Yeah.
a bit of a quirky thing. Now, look, if I was to be a really negative Nancy, one thing that does worry me, Tracey, is that there was no mention in the announcement as to how that fits in with the forward estimates put into the budget, right? And we all know, he's not going to admit this, but we all
Mhm.
know the Treasurer's pig-headedness, stubbornness, whatever you want to call it, about not changing the original policy was all about the revenue that he had factored in to the current budget and the forward estimates for the next 4 years. Now, we haven't heard how this will impact, because obviously that was a stumbling block for them wanting to change in the first place. So
Mhm.
if you apply that principle, does that mean that they will be reticent to do a cost reset? Because
Yeah.
maybe the larger capital gain will be where they claw back any concessions that they might have lost from a revenue perspective, with the new parameters that they've set for this policy. I don't know.
Yeah. And
It's a it's
yeah.
a it's a cynical way to look at it, I know, but hey, I don't put anything past these guys in Canberra.
No, I agree with you on that. Look, you could very well be right, Darin. And if that's the case, we've all, we've all been arguing that you can't tax unrealized gains, and they'll be like, well, we're not taxing unrealized gains, are we?
Yeah.
Exactly. We're
Yep.
taxing realized gains, and you never said anything about that, did you?
Yep.
So you look, I get the cynicism, but I also appreciate that there's got to be a position that the government takes here, and I think that you could be right in the sense of not getting a CGT reset or not getting any sort of, discounting on the growth of an asset that's been sitting there up until now, which seems very unfair from a member who, again, we've got, farm holders, and we've got business owners who have got property in their funds for all of these years, sometimes decades, who are going to be penalised under this model.
So this actually shifts the argument a little bit. And of course, I will say again, it's dependent upon the detail, which we don't have at the
Yeah.
moment. But this could actually shift the argument from it's so unfair taxing unrealized capital gains to it is so unfair applying a tax on capital gains, which is effectively retrospective that we didn't know about at the time the asset was purchased.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother argument potentially that the government will have to have
Yeah.
um, once they release the detail, if they don't put a reset clause in there or a reset point in time in there. So
Yeah. Well, nobody likes a retrospective tax, do they?
no, and of course
For
one of
good
the
reason. For good reason.
yeah, and,
That's
and one of the issues was how can you implement this retrospectively from 1 July 2025
yeah,
when there was so much unknown about it.
yeah,
People were complaining about that, and rightly so. I think, you've got to have time to prepare for it. You've got to have time to manage it. You've got to have time to understand what it actually means before you can move on whatever strategy that you might choose to take to
yes.
mitigate your tax liability under the Div 296 policy. But yeah, look, again, up in the air. We don't know how that's going to work as usual, but I am very cynical about obviously what the Treasurer might want to do here. Now, we must also clarify that it's not set in stone. They have
No,
committed to a consultation period, haven't they, Trace, before this goes
they
ahead?
have. They have committed to a consultation period, Darin. Now, when they did all of their discussion, and the Treasurer was in the media quite a bit, saying that they had consulted with the industry, and some of us in the industry were saying, "Okay, really? What does that consultation look like?" Well, who knows what this consultation period will look like? I suspect it will have to be a fairly quick consultative period, though, Darin, because we've got a start date of 1 July 26. We're already, 3 or 4 months through, 4 months, 5 months almost through the financial year. And, the government is saying that they'll interest in the fact sheet, they have said, and I quote, the government will introduce legislation to implement these changes as soon as possible in 2026. So, what does that mean as soon as possible in 2026? Are they giving themselves a leave pass once again so that will be, July, August, September 2026 going, we're still waiting on the final legislation to come through. What does it look like, and how can we help our clients?
Well, it's pretty interesting, I think, Tracy. I think that they probably have some sort of urgency now. So it wouldn't
Mm.
surprise me if it does go through quickly. Now, I just want to inform listeners, I'm not trying to paint a negative picture on this, but this is effectively what's been happening with the government with any proposed change to not only superannuation, but across the board with other policy issues as well, is that they have a consultation period, but the trend has been that this consultation period, the window is shrinking for all of them. So sometimes it's like a fortnightly thing, and the deadline to get it in is shrinking as well. So basically, once it's announced, whoever the stakeholder is has to get on their bike straight away and put in a submission. Now, the other thing is, this is without word of a lie, any of the consultations recently seem to have been ignored, completely ignored. Not just on this subject, I'm talking about across the board, seems to be the trend. So basically, what I'm getting at is that I don't think any of us should get our hopes up to think that the consultation period will make a difference. Now, I know that a lot of the change that has happened um, has included items or amendments that stakeholders in the SMSF sector have been pushing for, right? So
Yeah.
obviously unrealized tax on unrealized capital gains, indexation, those were the big two, and they have been granted.
Yes.
But I would actually say they haven't been granted because of industry pushing on this. Yes, yeah, absolutely. Push, 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 push to try and get these changes. But I think, and anybody who heard my update at the SMSF Trustee Empowerment Day, the rumours behind the scenes were that it was Paul Keating and Bill Kelty who had got in Prime Minister Albanese's ear to say
Yeah.
that this is unacceptable. You're going to have to sort this out. And then lo and behold, weeks later, I think 3 weeks to be exact, after I heard that news, this change came about. So I don't think we should be delusional, even though um, some of the things that were highlighted were in all of those consultation papers. But I don't think
Mm.
we should be delusional to think that, oh, yeah, and maybe the government will be open to other changes out of this consultation period. I think what we've got is what we're going to land with. And it'll just be a matter of going through the process to say that they've ticked that box and then pushing it through as legislation to, because they're not going to want to delay this anymore. That's a big concession going from 1 July 2025 to 1 July 2026 already. They're not going to
Yes.
be wanting to push it back any further. So I think we'll
Mm.
probably see a bit of urgency in this, and I don't think we should be under any illusions that there will be any further amendments made to the policy.
Yeah.
But that's just my
I
take on it. And I know I'm a
yeah.
very cynical individual, but I'm joining the dots from what's happened in the past to what might happen. Um,
Yeah.
what do they say? Past is prologue. If past
Yeah.
is prologue,
Yeah,
then
exactly.
that's effectively what's probably going to happen.
And I think that there's a sense of realism there as well, isn't there, Darren? Because we as much as we idealistically we don't want this tax at all. Idealistically, we're not going to get that, and so what are we going to be able to end up with, and is that more acceptable as opposed to less acceptable? And I think ultimately, I've said this on stage before, as when I've been asked this question, I don't want this tax. I'm not against having a higher tax rate if there needs to be a higher tax rate. Like that's fine. And most people I've spoken with who are very high income earners or have a whole lot of money in super are not against paying more tax either. It just has to be fair across the board. And so it does this, do these new measures and these new announcements give us that sense of fairness? I think they probably do. Ideally, we just like to get more certainty around some of the calculation methodologies and mechanisms, and what does that mean from an industry perspective? What does that mean from an accountant perspective as to what do I need to do for my clients and helping my trustees between now and 30th of June 2026 for this implementation start date from 1 July. So I think that we're closer. We're closer. And I kind of agree with you, Darin, as much as I want to see a reset of the CGT or some acknowledgement around what the gain is up to date. I'm not putting all of my eggs in one basket to say we're going to get that across the line, because that would be nice, but I don't know that we'll get there because of all of the issues that you've mentioned.
No, I have no expectation as far as that goes. I did want to clarify it by saying that I don't think that any of the advocacy process, especially from the SMSF Association, has not made a difference. I think it definitely has made a
Oh, for
difference.
sure.
And I think that's where all of this alertness of the backbenchers, as well as some of the other key ALP members, has probably come about because the message was just getting pushed that this was an unfair thing. All I'm saying that I don't, was is that I don't think it came from the consultation process as a
No.
process. Yes, the advocacy efforts did make a difference, but if we're pinning our hopes on a consultation process, I don't think that process alone made any difference. And to your other point, Tracy, I think that hopefully this maybe tones down the anti-SMSF sentiment that this whole policy seems to have kicked up a little bit
Yeah.
about how these bloody people with high balances, they shouldn't get tax concessions or whatever. And I think the fact that they are complaining against the taxation of unrealized capital gains did not reflect the fact that they didn't think it was fair that they should pay some more tax. But
Mm,
they have been demonized just to say, oh, they just want to keep rotting the system, which I don't agree with the argument anyway. But that's the argument that gets thrown up. So hopefully now we will actually see that, well, you see, a lot of SMSF members actually don't argue against paying a little bit more tax because maybe they thought that that whole zero tax concept in pension phase
mm,
was maybe a little bit too good to be true. And it was great while it lasted, but we kind of realized that it would probably change. It's just give us some reasonable change.
correct. Yeah,
Don't give
correct.
us some shock change that's gonna change everything, including the tenets of what our income tax system is actually based on. I mean that was pretty ludicrous. So hopefully the heat comes out of that argument, and the sector gets less demonized now as again
Yeah.
stereotypically people just wanting to rot the system, which is not true at all.
I hope so, Darin. I hope so because some of the comments that I've been reading over the last, however long, it feels like we've been talking about this forever. But as you know, some of the comments I've been reading have all been very much almost like a class warfare going on
Yeah.
between those people who don't have $3 million in super and those who do. So I just think I hope that this kind of tones it down for everybody. I did actually see a cartoon in a media outlet just in the last week, though, that tended to kind of indicate that maybe that won't be the case. So, hopefully everyone can kind of see some reason.
Yeah, well, I could see it returning back when I started covering the sector back in 2008.
Yeah,
I think it was Treasury had, was it a little red book or something? It was a reference book to superannuation,
yeah.
and in it it described SMSFs as um, something along the lines of the single most biggest tax rot
Oh,
in
really?
the system. Something along those lines where it was very negative towards SMSS and how they're exploiting the system to get
Mm,
more advantages.
mm.
I remember arguing at the time how unhealthy it was for a key institution to be communicating their views like that. They've since
Yeah,
scrapped that view, obviously, but the introduction of this policy almost reminded me of going back to those days where it was SMSFs who are basically the enemy of the state and the enemy of the superannuation system,
yeah,
because they're getting these tax concessions for high balance holders, which is like, the one thing that needs to be pointed out, and I keep pointing this out, that the people with those high balances, they've done nothing wrong. They've actually
no,
played by the rules. Yes, they've entered a situation where, there's some realization that, hey, maybe this has got out of control and we need to do something about it. But at the end of the day, they did nothing wrong to get to that point in time.
no.
So this whole demonization, I just really don't like. And again, as I said, hopefully that takes some of that heat out of the conversation where
Agreed.
this sector is just not seen as people who are just rorting the system and are gaining an unfair advantage,
Mm.
because of it. I think that whole discussion point, that whole narrative is completely unhelpful to anybody, not just SMSF members.
Absolutely. I was going to add that same point, Darren, that it doesn't help anybody. And so, we no one is happy with more tax really at the end of the day. However, we all appreciate that and and the taxation of earnings in the country, I should say, is what provides all of the amazing services that we have in the country as well. And we can be grateful and thankful for those services as well. So I think let's just hopefully get something that is workable, something that's fairer, and something that can give some certainty to our SMSF members and trustees so that they can be trusted trustees, right?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So I think we'll probably end it there.
Yep.
I think we've covered off all the detail that we actually know of right now.
Mm,
But as usual, um, it's a bit of a watch this space as to what happens from here on in. Look, hopefully there will be continuing positive outcomes
yep.
um, to come from this, but look, who knows? Again, the devil that is in the detail. Let's wait till the government issues some more detail, and maybe the final policy notes, obviously passes it into legislation, and then we can actually start to look at what members should do in order to react to how they want to manage their affairs in relation to this Div 296 tax measure.
Absolutely. I don't think we'll talk about it until then, hey?
Probably not, but I can't promise that we won't.
At least not live. At least not live. It'll be behind
No,
the
no, no,
scenes.
no,
We
probably
talk
not
about
live.
everything
There
behind the
are
scenes.
other things, and don't worry, we have already earmarked other subjects to cover. It's just that
We definitely
this
have.
has just been such a live issue that it would probably have been remiss of us not to actually update you on what the latest announcements are, because really in the mainstream news, you probably won't get as much detail as what we just talked about. Now, no
Absolutely.
doubt, they'll continue to pick holes in how certain aspects of this policy work. So there is still a lot to happen before the dust settles on this. But let's hope that the common sense approach continues, and we can
Yeah,
actually be left with something that, while we don't necessarily want, at least it's a palatable working solution to the new tax that will be imposed.
exactly. Exactly. Watch this space.
Indeed. Well, that brings us to an end of this episode of the Trusted Trustee podcast. So I'd just like to thank Tracey for her time today. Thank you very much, Tracey.
Thanks, Darin. It's been a pleasure once again, and I look forward to the next episode.
Absolutely. Thanks again to Superfund Property Valuations for its support. Thank you to my staff for putting these podcasts together and publishing them on social media. But most importantly, thank you for joining us. We hope you got some useful information out of the discussion, and we hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Until then, travel safely, and we'll see you the next time we do the Trusted Trustee podcast.
Bye for now.